now we're going. Okay. So this was by far the most difficult part of Rav Kook, and it almost did me in. It might have done me in. So I might be cooked out after this. So in trying to understand Rav Kook's take on nationalism, national identity, it brings us, hopefully, full circle, because if you recall, everything we talked about his philosophy was the idea with everything being imbued, right, that the kadosh and chol, the revealed kadosh, and then there's the revealed holiness, and then there is holiness that is sublimated within the mundane, right, and it's constantly being drawn forth towards this with this greater light. The greater light is the nation Israel in the land of Israel. So, kind of, we've always said that, and you've all kind of let it go as a given. But the question is, what does he mean by that? Why is Israel the source of that light, of that holiness, right? That reverse dark hole, that light hole, if it were, that is drawing forth all of the holiness, right? That's what we want to kind of understand, if we can, in the writings of Rav Kook. And these are the most, he used the word sublime a lot, but these are the most sublime of the sublime of what we've studied so far. But let's begin with something that I think we can talk about. Let's look at this very first paragraph in the source sheet. I'll read it, and then we need to discuss it. The difference between the Jewish soul in all its essence, inner desires, strivings, character, and standing, and the soul of all the Gentiles on all their levels is greater and deeper than the difference between the soul of man and the soul of animal. For the difference in the latter case is one of quantity, while the difference in the first case is one of essential quality.
So,
okay, wait. First of all, tell me what he's saying, and then tell me what you feel about it.
Well, if he's saying it's in quantity, that suggests to me that he's talking about that the man has two souls and the animals have one soul, and this is the quantity.
No, it's not quite what he's saying.
All right, so
not quite
quantity.
What he's saying.
So how many
he's
souls
talking about
does
different. Wait, he's talking
have?
about the difference between what? He's making a syllogism.
The
Jewish
souls and Gentile souls.
Huh?
Jewish souls and Gentile souls.
Okay, he's saying that the difference between a Jewish soul and a Gentile soul is greater than the difference between
man and
a human soul and an animal soul. You understand that? A Jewish soul and a Gentile soul are farther apart, are more different, more distant, more distinct than an animal soul and a human soul.
So,
and because the difference between a human and an animal soul is one of what? Quantity. A human has more neshama, more soul, than an animal. That's what he seems to be saying. While the Jewish soul is qualitatively different than the Gentile soul. Okay, let's stop right there. What do you think? I'm going to go around the room. All right, I'll let you start with you, Fred. We're going to go around there. I want everyone's opinion.
All right, so two things. One, it sounds like apples and oranges. We're talking about the quantity and the quality. Two, that where does then this human soul that has the separation from the animal soul fall in this span between the Jewish soul and the Gentile soul?
Okay, good question. That's the Kuzari.
Really? See, did you read it? No, what I think I see is that the Jewish soul has the if the Jewish soul has the ability to do what you described right at the beginning. That is,
But
to be
I
able to
describe
see
what
the
he
light.
described. Oh,
No,
what I
mean,
described.
To
Okay,
be able
yeah.
to see the
Light.
have the ability to see the light, to be able to distinguish.
Okay, so that's
You know,
necessary.
yeah.
So you're saying
Yeah.
it follows with his what we
Yeah.
said up to now, that there's got to be something more distinctive about the Jewish soul. Okay, how do you feel about that? Okay,
I would agree.
Wait, anything to offer?
I want to pass on.
Okay,
Come back to
Aggie.
Well, it's a generalization, which, those things are never good. But,
Does it bother you at all?
yeah,
paragraph?
that it's it's a blanket statement for all Gentile souls where we know plenty of,
How are you reading? What are you hearing? Tell me what you're hearing.
well, that one's better than the other, I think.
Okay. Betsy?
First of all, I thought animals don't have souls.
Oh, they do.
Okay, good to know. And the other,
For me to all.
the other part, I absolutely do not accept.
Bothers you
Yes.
deeply.
Yes.
Okay, good.
It's offensive.
You find it
It
offensive. Okay.
violates-
I think that's what
it-
Betsy didn't want to say.
Yeah,
but
it
Ben-
violates some of my core beliefs that human beings possess a soul and that no soul is greater than another soul, that they're all of equal value and equal,
But if you
that's-
say that though,
abilities.
then the fact that we got the Torah says
Everybody
to
has
me,
a job. That's our job.
that's our job. I know, but that says that we have to have something special. I'm just saying, and I'm not saying like I'm.
No, see, I don't think we have anything special. I think we have a
We don't all
special
got something
challenge. I
special.
think
Well,
That's
and,
different.
and we also then have the issue that does come up in discussion is about a part of the world in the world to come. And so there are differences of opinions in terms of whether the non-Jew can have a part or an equal part in the world to come, and how that would
when
work
somebody
out.
comes back and tells me, I'll listen.
Okay, so it bothers
I don't
you.
care about world.
So it bothers some of you. Okay, that's good because we're going to see. So now we have to see. By the way, it bothered somebody else who wrote to him, and he clarified. So we'll get there in a minute. Before we get there, let's understand that there are those that actually believe exactly what you read here. One of my chaver once wrote an article called "It's an Inconvenient Truth." So the Kuzari believes, he says there's the soul of inanimate objects, the souls of plants, souls of animals, the souls of humans, and then the souls of Jews. Right? The Jews are on a qualitatively different plane. Okay. Now, even the Maharal. Now, the Maharal of Prague was one of the influences on Rav Kook. So I'm just taking one little piece, and all this is just, remember, Rav Kook's writings, and Maharal's writings, are very, very, very vast. And we're taking 2 or 3 sentences, right? But they do generalize certain things. But let's see. We're going to come back and expand on this first paragraph. So let's see what the Maharal has to say. Monica, would you mind reading that?
This is because Israel is unique and transcendent among all nations who are on the level of matter, while Israel is on the level of form. We've explained this many times, as Chazal said, you are called man, and the Gentile nations are not called man. It is as if it were obvious.
By the way, because when the prophets speak to Israel, sometimes they'll refer to the Jew as Ish, but not necessarily the other nations. That's the technical, what it means is that you're being called man, right?
It is as if it were obvious to them that the status of Israel vis-a-vis the value of the nations is as the status of man vis-a-vis unspeaking animals.
Okay, you see the influence of the Maharal on what we just read.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, on Rav Kook. Okay,
This is because man transcends animals in that man is not physical and material to the extent of other animals. Rather, man is intelligent.
so that's the quantitative difference between humans and animals, intellect, right?
So too is the stature of Israel, who transcend the material and whom matter does not inhere. It is as though, with regard to Israel, the material is null in the presence of the spirit, and matter is nothing but a vehicle upon which the spirit rides. This matter is null compared to its rider, just as a donkey is null and inconsequential next to its rider. This is the status of Israel when they do God's bidding, when they are transcended form exclusively. The opposite is the case vis-a-vis the Gentile nations. It is as though the soul is null next to the body, and as though they entirely body and matter.
Okay, so what he's trying to say, it would seem, is that the difference between humans is this body and soul, and which takes precedent. And when the Jew is following the dictates, the soul takes precedent, right? The spiritual takes precedent over the material, but for others, that's not the case. Seems to be the opposite. Okay, still bothersome, correct?
A rider of a donkey is not a rider if the donkey's not there.
Okay, so
I mean, so there's a flaw in his logic.
okay, we're not discussing the Maharal today. I'm just using it to show you can see the influence of the Maharal directly on Rav Kook. Okay, now before we go, so there are two individuals that if you go to the footnotes on the bottom for a minute before we get to the next paragraph. So a little bit of an education. So Vladimir Solovyov was a Russian philosopher, theologian, poet, pamphleteer, and literary critic. This is all from Wikipedia, by the way. He played a significant role in the development of Russian philosophy and poetry at the end of the 19th century and the spiritual renaissance of the early 20th century. Now, apparently, one of his adherents was Rabbi Shmuel Alexandrov of Babarusk, from 1865 to 1941.
Yeah.
Yes, he was, actually. Which one? Both of them actually Jewish. So, Rav Shmuel Alexander was a prominent student of Volozhin Yeshiva, right at the end of the 19th century, actually probably in the 19th, early 20th century, who became close to the tradition of Chabad Hasidism. Alexandrov was a Jewish Orthodox mystical thinker, philosopher, and individualist anarchist whose religious thought and original blending of Kabbalah, Orthodox Judaism, contemporary philosophy, and secular literature are marked by universalism and some degree of antinomianism. What does that sound like? Someone who would be friends with Rav Kook.
Yeah.
Alexandrov was
Or
influenced
Rabbi
by the anarchistic implications of the work of Rav Kook, from which he sought to derive practical instruction. Another influence on Alexandrov was Russian philosopher Vladimir Solovyov. Alexander lived his entire life in Babarusk, and perished in the Holocaust. Okay, why am I introducing you to these two individuals? So we can get to the third source. So apparently, this Rabbi Shmuel Alexandrov read this paragraph in Rav Kook and wrote a letter to Rav Kook. And in that letter to Rav Kook, he says as follows: I recall that you, Rav Kook, mentioned the thinker Solovyov, what was his name? Vladimir Solovyov, favorably, right? You seem to be an adherent. But it seems to be based only on hearsay. That must not be true. Why must it not be true? For had you read the works of this philosopher, you certainly would have known that amongst the spiritual giants of Christendom, as well, the concept of worship out of love and awe of God's exaltedness in its purest and highest sense are not for it. What is Rav Alexandrov telling to Rav Kook?
That he can't say that their souls are necessarily on a lower level.
This idea of spiritual distinctiveness that you want to call out upon Jews, right, and say is non-existent amongst the Christians or the non-Jews, the Gentiles, is not true. If in fact you are a student of, right, Solovyov. Is that correct? Okay, so in other words, he's attacking Rav Kook for this statement. He disagrees with this statement of Rav Kook.
But he's more descriptive of what that spiritual essence is, in terms of the concept of worship out of love and all of God's exaltedness.
Well, because in other words, the idea of that aspirational ability. Because again, we're taking mere sentences out of essay upon essay of conversation and writings. Okay, so, but essentially what he's saying is, how can you say this and still believe that you? So, Rav Kook responds to this. So you tracking with me so far?
Okay.
Well, Rav Kook says his sourcing for that apparently from, at least in part, from the Moral of Prague, the attack upon that belief, and now we're going to get, what is his response to all of this? So, his response...
Well, wouldn't Rav Kook have come up with this also from what he learned from Chazal or the Talmud, that, the neshama we're given, where maybe there's not any book, any text that talks about the Gentile's soul, but what we know of what the Jewish soul is. So is he coming up with this idea, not independently by himself for the first time, but because of what we know to be the Jewish soul?
Well, he sources his beliefs, but everybody sources their belief. I once had a scholar on that here, and you can always find a source that supports your position. Sourcing doesn't necessarily, yes, of course he finds sources, but they're not universal sources.
Soul is, but rarely do we compare it to the...
Do we? I don't think I understand the Jewish soul. not to argue with you, but... Well, let's, we're only halfway into the conversation, so
it reminds me of so I'm related to some Kohanim, as you well know. So one of them in the family doesn't go to any funerals because he thinks he's not allowed to, until somebody told me, well, you can go to a non-Jewish funeral and be in the same room. You can't go to a Jewish funeral and be in the same room. So is that where this concept
possibly,
comes from?
quite possibly, but that actually might get us closer. So let's see what Rav Kook says and how it gets us into this further conversation. To which Rav Kook responded to the statement of Rav Alexandrov. He says as follows: so too, what you have reminded me of, that the descriptions of higher love, right? Meaning, what is higher love here? What does it mean here by higher love? Let's go back. Huh?
God's love for people, or vice versa.
Higher love means our love of what? Our ability to love. V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha. You shall love the Lord your God. Right? It's a commandment to the Jewish people. That was the first Havamina. Was who can extend to that? V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha. You shall love the Lord your God means what? What does that mean to love Hashem? This is Rabbi Zack, Philosophy 101. What does it mean to love God?
Trust.
To recognize him as the creator and the source of life.
Well, we talk about
One word.
knowing.
Correct. To know God. To love God is to know God. How do we know that knowing is loving? Intimate knowledge of God. How do we know that? Give me a proof text.
Adam and Eve.
And not just Adam and Eve, but what?
Well, that Adam knew Eve.
And he knew her over and over again in the Bible. Represents intimacy, right? To know a person in the biblical context means to have intimacy with them, right? To know God is to, right? And to have intimacy is to love somebody. Love somebody means I want to know you intimately. True love is to want to know somebody. I want to know everything about you. I want to get inside of you, right? That's to love somebody, is to have intimate knowledge.
But you can't know God.
Well, we can't have full total knowledge, but to love God is to want to know Him. And the more that, and we aspire, and we have the ability, now this is clear, we have the ability to know God to a greater extent than perhaps non-Jews, and prophets to a greater extent than average Jews, correct? And Moshe to a greater extent than any Jew, or any person, or any human being, or any prophet. So there is some kind of hierarchy. So let's see what he says.
Because of the mitzvah we were given.
Correct. Well, partly because of the mitzvah, but I have chosen you to be, right? But there is an element of chosenness and distinctiveness. But here's where we're going to get into the weeds a little bit. Of what do we mean by chosenness? What do we mean by distinctiveness? What do we mean by
Just because
love?
one people are chosen doesn't mean others aren't chosen for other tasks.
Okay, so let's get to where he makes the distinction here. Okay, so here again. So too, what you have reminded me of, that the descriptions of higher love, meaning to be able to know God on some spiritual, more intimate level, are not unique to the Jews, because the greatest Gentile thinkers also speak of it. I never said that the highest ideas are lacking amongst the human race. If they would be naturally lacking, right, if it didn't exist amongst humanity overall, there would be no hope of raising them to the heights of beatitude, which is our hope for it. In other words, what's the ultimate goal? What's the ultimate goal?
That everyone recognizes God.
Right, everyone. God will be one and his name will be one amongst what? All humanity. Well, if all humanity doesn't have any capacity or ability to know God, then how can that happen? That's what he's saying here. Yes, of course that exists amongst humanity. Rather, they are quite hidden and do not live in the heart of the nations at the essence of their nationality. Now he's making a distinction. He's not talking, when you talk individuals, absolutely. That's not what I'm talking about. On an individual level, a non-Jew or Gentile can aspire, just like a Jew can aspire. It's on the national level that there is a qualitative difference. That's where he's getting into the concept of nationality. Okay, so let's see now. Okay, so we've made one. So now let's see what he's talking about on the national level. And it's still quite different. I can't say I'm 100% there myself, but let's see if we can get pretty close. So, amongst God's inheritables, meaning Jewish people, the love of God is its inner character from which its national life flows. The nation of Israel only exists as a nation because why?
Dedication.
Atem tiyuli mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh. You will be to me a nation of priests and a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. We're only a nation because God declared us a nation, right? And what kind of a nation? A nation of priests, a spiritual nation. Our nationhood is distinctive, right? Our nationhood is distinctive from other types, other nationalities. Do you hear that? That our sense of nationhood, otherwise,
Right.
Okay. So, consequently, it is inescapable that there is also a difference between the individual people, even if the difference is sometimes very subtle, since part of the spirit of the group devolves upon each individual thereof. Therefore, even the individual can joyously recite, "Blessed is he who has not made me a Gentile." So, in other words, the fact that you can say "Shalom Asani Gai" in the morning, right? Because now you have this problem. Well, if on an individual level we're all the same, how can I make that blessing? On the other hand, my sense of being part of the nation of Israel endows me as an individual with some of that distinctiveness. But that distinctiveness on an individual level does not negate any spiritual capacity to love God, to know God, outside of the nation of Israel. Okay, so now he's kind of creating some stepping stones. Okay, let me stop there. All right, first of all, y'all tracking with what he's saying?
I think one of the problems is the word nation.
Yeah, that's what I was about to ask.
Because nation, when you talk about the Jewish people, the word nation means a lot of different things with the Jewish people. We're a religion, we're a culture, we're a political system, if you talk about Israel. The word nation, when you talk about the other nations, you can be talking about other religions, you can be talking about other political entities, you can be talking about other cultures. And that's each one of those is a different manifestation. Where for us, it's all wrapped up in one, or at least in my head it is.
Yeah.
It may not be for other people, but in my head it is.
So, what he says about that, so I didn't bring it in here. Give me. Do you mind running into my office? On my desk, one of them is a red book, says Orot of Rav Kook. If you know, it's got some red tabs in. If you don't mind bringing it out.
And that's always the dilemma. I've sort of, well, not always. You have the Haredim who don't believe in the modern state of Israel. But that's not what he's talking
he's
about.
not. That's
Right.
when you
Well,
talk about state. That's the other the other nations are. In other words, yes. But what are nations about? If you think of Plato or what is a nation?
So
Nations Day. What is it?
You had it face down open on this
Okay.
page, so I don't know if that was significant or not.
Well, it's so before we go there, let's see if this will help us out. Let's look at the second, so top of the second page. But the blessed awareness that is unique to Israel. Remember, it says in God says in Shmuel, B'ni Bechori Yisrael, right? My firstborn Israel, right? Israel is my Bechor, my firstborn nation. Like grapes in the desert, I found Israel, like the first fruits of the fig, which is the processing of divine ideals, to process and perfect them, to make effort to sublimate them, to promote them within the nation, mankind, and the world. In other words, what is my firstborn Israel's purpose?
Be a light unto the nations.
Well, before you can be a light unto the nation, what do you have to do? You have to perfect
Yourself.
that which I hold ideal, right?
Processing the divine ideals.
Right, the divine ideals as represented in the Torah. You have to emulate those and reflect those, obviously. Right? Remember, he said earlier, if you're not, those that are, so you'll see it later. You have to represent the ideal of Torah, right, of Am Yisrael, not the right. Then once you do that, this is the deepest knowledge of the wise and understanding nation, whose laws and statutes in this whole Torah are just, filled with sublime ideals and glorious and reliable divine notions of how to move from potential to actual in every generation. This is the enlightened worship of God, the service of sons who internally sense the inner connection to their Father and Creator, the source of goodness, life, and light. So imagine Israel is like Israel is like the light bulb or the energy source, right? When it is plugged in, when all the cables are aligned with God, what happens?
It shines.
It shines. It's that light. Now, once it shines, once that light is fully illuminated, that's what makes Israel. Israel is the source, not the source, is the, I don't want to say reflection, but in a way it's reflection, but it is the light when it is plugged in perfectly, right? Then it lights up. It's that orb, that glow, that then does what?
Well, it's a beacon for the others to follow.
It's the beacon that draws forth all of the other light that we've been talking about from the other nations. That's how he formulates. That's his formulation. You understanding that? His formulation is that Israel was designed, my firstborn was, when you connect all of these ideas and ideals, and right, when the fruit, right, it's like when it's the first fruit, right, the first grapes in the desert, and how does he say it? Right, and when they're able to go from potential to actual, when they're able to actualize themselves, then that light becomes a beacon. Whoever said beacon? Who said beacon? No. Very good. Beacon is the right kind of term. It becomes the beacon now that the good in everything, all the other nations, right, comes forward. We'll talk about what the difference is in a minute. Okay, so I might skip this and go. So let's, I'm going to come back to this other section, and let's go to the last source. Actually, I can't do that. I got to do this first. So I'll read you some sources from Rav Kook that better describe this. It's just really hard reading, really hard reading. And it's hard if I read it to you. And I didn't want to spend all the time just going through. I really wanted to get this vision, this visual out to you, which I think I've done. But this week I spoke about, on Shabbat, about Moshiach ben Yosef versus Moshiach ben David, right? And whoever was in
Physical
Shul.
versus the...
Right. So it's interesting because he discusses this here in a way that is the same idea. When he talks about what he basically says about the other nations, when you talk about other nations, there's a certain, what is nationalism? What is nationalism amongst others? When you think of, remember, what time did he live? What time did Rav Kook live? What period? Pre-World War post World War I. He lived through World War I,
Yeah.
right? And he was pre-World War II. What was the world like?
Everybody was.
Extremely nationalistic.
Yeah, everybody was established.
Right before it was the rise of communism, which was kind of a bit of a response to certain nationalism. And nationalism was all about developing these isolating kind of things that protect one's economy, one's sense of superiority, one's sense of acquisition, really the baser kind of parts of man, the lower parts of man. That's why he kind of makes, when he talks about that distinction, remember, he's thinking religiously, spiritually, and politically all the time. So part of that thinking of the difference between Israel and the other nations being so far apart is because now when you think of his idea of the nation of Israel, is this idea of becoming this beacon. That's what he's thinking of. Whereas all other nations are about this sense of nationalism that's all about, we're the,
Control
I think of some
territory.
Russian marching song or something comes to mind, of this super nationalist ideal. Some of what we read, again, can remind you of some when you talk about being very isolationist and protectionist. Same kind of ideas. You're protecting your economy, you're protecting food on the table, you're protecting your status, socioeconomic and other status. All of those things are part of what nations do. But the nation of Israel, that's not ideally what they're trying to do. It's not what God intended for Israel to do. That's why he's saying now. Now it seems a lot less offensive when he talks about the nation of Israel being this, again, nation, not individual. The nation of Israel is as far from the other nations, maybe further, than just the basic idea of how man and animals are different.
Well, and because of the time also that Israel was not a physical nation, it was just a spiritual. It was the people coming back together and being in the land, but to draw upon some degree of the spiritualism sanctity in some way, whether
So correct. So by the way, that's why, if you remember early on, this idea of being this beacon again, because it involves a certain sense of nationhood. That's why he connects it to what? The land of Israel, right? That it can't be just a religious experience. And by the way, if you think about it, many of the commandments of the Torah are mitzvot tulot ba'aretz. They're mitzvot that require being in the land of Israel. They only pertain in the land of Israel, right? Because that idea, so in other words, in essence, we have to be a nation where we're like other nations, is that there's a piece of land that we call ours, right? That's our physical nationhood, but it's much more than that. The goal isn't development of the land. The goal isn't to produce. The goal isn't, right? The goal is this higher spiritual to become this beacon. Okay, so hold that for a minute. So now, there's a verse in Zechariah, it's source number 3, okay? V'shchavti el Beit David v'al Yoshvei Yerushalayim ruachem v'tachanunim v'yibitu alai et asher dakaru v'safdu alav k'mispeid al hayachid v'hamer alav v'hamer kol habachor. But I will fill the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem with a spirit of pity and compassion, and they shall lament to me about those who are slain, wailing over them as over a favorite son and showing bitter grief as over a firstborn. So the understanding of this verse, according to the Gemara, is that somebody has died. And there's a hesped, there's a eulogy being given. So the Gemara has two opinions as to who is being mourned. One says, we'll look inside a minute, it's the death of Mashiach ben Yosef. And the other opinion says it's the death of the evil inclination, of evil. And we're going to come full circle in a minute and see how Rav Kook ties the two together. Okay, so let's look at the Gemara. Apropos to the eulogy at the end of days. So this is apparently a vision of Zechariah at the end of days, and there's a eulogy taking place. The Gemara asks, for what is the nature of this eulogy? The Gemara answers, Rabbi Dos and the rabbis disagree concerning this matter. It's a machloket. One said that there's a eulogy for Mashiach ben Yosef, who was killed in the war of Gog and Magog, prior to the ultimate redemption with the coming of the Messiah of Mashiach ben David, right? There's first Mashiach ben Yosef, as I mentioned on Shabbat. So apparently he's killed, and now before Mashiach ben David comes, there's this eulogy being given, this funeral for him. And one said that this eulogy is for the evil inclination that was killed, that apparently at the end of this war of Gog and Magog, and before Mashiach ben David comes, there's no longer an evil inclination, right? Which allows the Mashiach to come now. We can have, right, the end of days, right? It's all good. We've now defeated the Satan. Okay? So, the Gemara asks, granted, according to the one who said that the lament is for Moshiach ben Yosef who was killed, this would be the meaning of that which is written in the context, and they shall look unto me because they have thrust him through, and they shall mourn for him as one mourns for his only son. That sounds like, okay, that could be Moshiach ben Yosef. However, according to the one who said, on the contrary, the eulogy is for the evil inclination that was killed, does one need to conduct a eulogy for this? In other words, are we sad? Are we crying over the death of the evil inclination of the Yetzer Hara? Why are you eulogizing? I didn't say eulogizing Moshiach ben Yosef. Why are you eulogizing the evil inclination? You understand the question? Okay. So on the contrary, one should conduct a celebration. We should be having a mesiba. We should be having a party that the evil inclination was destroyed. Why then did they cry? So the Gemara answers, this could be understood as Rabbi Yehuda taught. In the future, at the end of days, God will bring the evil inclination and slaughter it in the presence of the righteous and in the presence of the wicked. For the righteous, the evil inclination appears to them as a high mountain, and for the wicked appears to them as a mere strand of hair. These weep and those weep. The righteous weep and say, how were we able to overcome so high a mountain? Right? How are we able to overcome the evil inclination? Inclination was so huge. And the wicked weep and say, how are we unable to overcome this strand of hair? It was like, to us, it was nothing. We're so easily drawn to do evil. It was like nothing. How were we not able to overcome it? So each one is weeping for, and even the Holy One, blessed be He, will wonder with them as it is stated with regard to eulogy. So says the Lord of hosts, if it be wondrous in the eyes of the remnant of this people in those days, it should be wondrous in my eyes. It's a little later in Zechariah. Okay, so there's this machloket. Now let's look at what Rabbi Kook has to say about this. Israel's nationalistic character as such is revealed in the character of Moshiach ben Yosef. However, the ultimate purpose is not merely national consolidation and seclusion, but rather the desire to unify the whole world into a single family and for all to call out in God's name. Now, in order to understand this, I have to go back. What was the role of Mashiach ben Yosef versus Mashiach ben David? What was his role?
Bring order to the world?
Political leadership, exactly. Bring order to the world. That was what he was all about. So we're of Kook, right? He was about bringing about a certain nationalistic fruition, bringing nations to a certain place of stability. So he wants to say, so that's Mashiach ben Yosef. However, but why are we eulogizing him? But what's the ultimate purpose? Is not merely national consolidation and seclusion, not just to get all the nations lined up, to have a really healthy, UN, but rather to desire to unify the whole world into a single family, right? It'll be on that day that the spiritual, in other words, again, you need that in order for the beacon. Now, you have to have the beacon, but then you have to have people seeking out the beacon. You needed Mashiach ben Yosef to create the opportunity for everybody to seek out that beacon, to see it for what it is, to appreciate it. But what's the goal? For everybody to go towards that goal. So that's what he's saying here. So then he said, even though this requires a dedicated center, right? That's the nation of Israel. Its whole goal. Now think about how you felt at the beginning. Now he's saying just the opposite. Even though you need a dedicated center, right? That's the nation Israel when it's doing the will of God, right? its whole goal is not merely to serve as the center, to say, I'm superior, I'm in the middle, I'm better, right? But also to have a more universal impact. It's not just to be then say, look at where we are now fulfilling the will of God, we glow brighter than everybody else, we are superior. That's not the purpose. Now to have a universal impact. Suddenly we've gone from the individual, the particularistic, which was very much what we read that first paragraph. We're thinking, wow, how much more particular can you get in the way he states the difference between Israel and the rest of the nations, right? The Gentile, the Jew and the Gentile. You can't get more particular than that statement. Now he's saying just the opposite. No. It's the universal impact. When the world needs to transition from nationalism to universalism, there needs to be some sort of destruction of things that took root as a result of nationalism narrowly defined, which includes the drawbacks of excessive particularistic love. Now he's saying the nationalism of the other nations was a self-love that had to be destroyed. That's the death of Mashiach ben Yosef, right? When he's overcome that, right? Therefore, Mashiach ben Yosef will ultimately die, and the true and lasting kingdom will be that of Mashiach ben David. When the trait of longing for universal good overtakes and annuls the value of nationalistic isolationism, it is only one small step before evil is also purged from individual life. Because when you get to that level, what's not going to be able to survive? When you're at that point now, that universal, you get it, you're all plugged in, evil can't prosper. So evil will die as well. Thus, the termination of the evil impulse and the killing of Mashiach ben Yosef are very similar ideas. You see how Rav Kook he's saying it's not one or the other in that Gemara, it's both. With the death of Mashiach ben Yosef at the right time will also lead to the death of the evil inclination. Therefore, Chazal disputed regarding the verse, and they shall lament those that were slain, whether it refers to the slaying of Mashiach ben Yosef or the slaying of evil impulse. Look at how we started. Look at what we came to. Isn't that pretty amazing? Did y'all get there with me? Y'all feel a little better than you did 40 minutes ago? I hope. Yeah? All right. So, and that, I think, pretty much rounds out, a very cursory exploration of the philosophy of Kook. Just to, let me just tell you how this, let me read this to you, and I'll tell you why this is very difficult. So this is the essential chapter. He talks about Jewish nationalism. He calls it Knesset Yisrael. Rabbi Soloveitchik also uses this term, Knesset Yisrael, to talk about the difference on Yom Kippur, for example, when we talk about the power of the day. How can it be that it just by being in shul, right, just by observing Yom Kippur, some of my sins are taken away? Don't have to do the whole process of tshuva. Yeah, as an individual, yes. But if you're part of Knesset Yisrael, if you're part of the nation of Israel, by showing up, you're showing you're part of the nation of Israel, then you are part of the collective. And as the collective, as the nation is forgiven, you are part of that forgiveness as well. You still have your own individual sins to deal with. Again, Rabbi Soloveitchik uses similar types of idea between the individual and the nation. But here's what he says. The character of the soul of Knesset Israel is distinguished at its root from the character of every people and tongue, period. Okay, so now he's saying the same thing, right? There's a difference between Israel and the other nations. In every people and tongue, the innermost point of the desire for collective life is founded on the economic content in all its forms, meaning it's a matter of economy that nations come together, right? Or that a nation, on the foundation of internal worrying within man to fortify his material life's standing, right? A nation is about self-preservation, first and foremost. I think that's what he's saying. Like, that's what characterizes nations.
Preservation and promotion.
Correct. The higher spirit that enlivens and illuminates this point is the spirit of order and beauty, which is the desire for sensual pleasure according to the dictates of man's heart. It's kind of using kind of a Hellenistic philosophic approach to, again, you speak about the generally nations in general, right? Beauty, form, sustenance. When in a collective, these are a single style, this equation makes the national character. Okay, when everybody agrees to kind of this idea of what do you say, of order and beauty and all the dictates, or when there's a sense of agreement that's what creates the national character. He's saying when there's a unity about who we are, what makes the French French and Italians Italian, so to speak. I think maybe. However, in Israel, the divine character is lodged in the depths of the nature of the nation's soul, the thirst for knowledge and divine feeling, in its utmost sublimity and purity, is for Israel the point wherein life is felt, and the pleasures that derive from the perfection of this picture, and all the breadth and depths of life, these are the aesthetic directions. In other words, our idea of nature is around what? The spiritual, love, knowledge of God, connecting with God. That's where we connect. That's what our nationhood is based on. The inner opinion that recognizes that in the filling of this sublime longing, all is filled, that there are none of life's objectives, pleasures, orders, and contents that are not contained within this infinite point. This recognition is something specific to Israel, embedded in national nature, manifesting the interior consciousness of even the masses, and progressively clarified and crystallized for the exceptionally gifted in every generation. Again, the inner opinion that recognized that in filling of this sublime longing, all is filled. In other words, basically what he's saying is, if we're aspiring to this spiritual fulfillment, it encompasses every aspect of our life. I think that's what he's saying. Right, all is filled. That there are none of life's objectives, pleasures, orders, and contents that are not contained within this infinite point. Now, I would say it's a little bit differently. When I often speak about Judaism as a religion to non-Jews and to uneducated Jews sometimes, is that Judaism is not a religion. Judaism is a way of life, right? Judaism infiltrates every aspect of my life. From the moment I wake up to the moment I go to sleep, my Judaism infiltrates my life. Not so. Now, I don't know about Islam. Maybe I'm not. Christianity. That's not the case. Right? It doesn't infiltrate every. Yes, there's certain ethics and morals that one aspires to in everything that you do. But Judaism tells me how to get up in the morning, how to clothe myself, everything about my day. Right? There's nothing in Judaism. It's a way of life. Okay. So what else does he say? The divine phenomenon within life's every value and the depth of the soul's nature, corresponding to the life sap of the nation's history, right? Which is drawn out of our history, right? Manifesting in the talent of prophetic creation in her chosen sons, elevating to the level of an eternal people, the gift of whose soul will be recognized by all humanity. This is the Israelite essence whose attributes are revealed in all the different movements, and the spirit of Messiah proceeds to complete this character until the time that it is perfected. So he's saying is all of our history, Jewish history, has been leading up to this point where we'll get to what he said earlier, what Rav Kook said earlier, right? When we get to that point where Mashiach can bring about the fruition of all of this. It's not easy to comprehend. It's not easy to pull out. You couldn't even begin to understand these two paragraphs, this one paragraph, without doing what we did previously tonight. But the idea being, again, not that he denies the universal mission and purpose of the Jewish nation. But to get to that universal mission requires a very particular concept of nationhood that is demonstratively different from what we consider the nationhood of the other nation, of the quote-unquote the Gentiles. Once we understand that the purpose is to be a beacon, and that beacon draws forth all of that light that we've been talking about up until now we can see how it all comes together. And that when that will happen, then we can have, right, the universal ideal. We can have Yemot HaMashiach. We can have the Messianic reality.
And laser could be used as somewhat of a model because of the excitement of the molecules and the alignment of it coming out in a coherent form.